The Hidden Struggles of Canada, the Decline of the Canadian Dream. A Nation's Turning Point. On October 19, 2015, Canadians turned out in record numbers, eager to reshape the country's future. Their votes ushered Justin Trudeau into office as Prime Minister, accompanied by cheering crowds and his rallying cry.
It's time for a change in this country, my friends, a real change!
It was a hopeful moment, filled with promises of affordable living, ample housing, and prosperity for all. But fast forward to today, and that hope has soured. Housing prices have soared beyond reach, food banks are overwhelmed, and many immigrants are leaving Canada in frustration. The Canadian dream? For many, it has turned into a grim reality. The housing crisis. Ask Canadians about their future, and many will tell you they've given up on the dream of owning a home. Housing affordability has become one of the most pressing issues, rooted in a confluence of historical and modern-day challenges. In the post-war era, accessible housing policies and government-led initiatives supported homeownership for a growing middle class. Programs like the National Housing Act of 1944 and sustained public investment in affordable housing created opportunities for families to build stability. However, over the decades, a combination of market liberalization, reduced public spending on social housing, and a surge in speculative investment shifted the housing landscape. Concurrently, stagnant wages failed to keep pace with inflation, making it increasingly difficult for Canadians to afford homes. Today, this crisis is exacerbated by a limited housing supply, escalating land values, and restrictive zoning laws, which collectively push homeownership out of reach for many. Without comprehensive intervention, housing affordability threatens to widen economic inequality and reshape societal norms in Canada. To purchase an average home in Canada today, a household must earn $170,000 annually, more than double the median family income of $70,000. In Vancouver, the required income spikes to $360,000. Home ownership, once an attainable goal for most Canadians, now feels like a fantasy. Decades ago, wages and housing prices moved in tandem, a balance that allowed families to own homes without undue financial stress. This equilibrium stemmed from stable economic policies and societal norms that prioritized accessible housing. During this period, local governments invested in infrastructure to support growing populations, and mortgage rates were more closely aligned with household incomes. However, over the years, shifts in economic strategies such as deregulation in the financial sector and limited investment in affordable housing disrupted this harmony. These changes, coupled with speculative real estate practices, widened the gap between wages and housing prices, creating the affordability crisis we see today. But today, the gap between income and property costs has widened dramatically. The average house in Vancouver, priced at nearly $2 million, offers modest, unimpressive living conditions compared to what similar money buys in cities like Austin, Texas. Toronto faces a similar dilemma, where even suburban homes require bidding wars well above their listing prices. Renting isn't much easier. A chronic shortage of rental housing, caused by years of underbuilding, rising population, and restrictive zoning laws, has pushed vacancy rates to a historic low of 1.5%. Canadians looking for apartments face fierce competition, often battling hundreds of other applicants for a single unit. As demand far outstrips supply, landlords hike rents to unprecedented levels. In Toronto and Vancouver, a one-bedroom apartment now costs nearly $3,000 per month on average, leaving little room for savings or other expenses. The consequences are dire. Families are cutting back on essentials, taking on multiple jobs, and, in extreme cases, living in their cars. Debt has become a lifeline, pushing Canada's household debt-to-GDP ratio to one of the highest in the world. Meanwhile, housing supply issues persist, exacerbated by government inaction and policies that have failed to address the root causes. Even the federal first-time homebuyer incentive program, designed to make housing more affordable, has faced criticism for its limited reach and inability to counteract skyrocketing prices. Immigration, while vital to Canada's economy, has added pressure to the housing market. Since 2016, the government has welcomed nearly 3 million immigrants and over 1 million international students, all competing for limited housing. Without matching this population growth with adequate housing construction, affordability has worsened. For example, students at the University of British Columbia, UBC, have resorted to living in vans or commuting from other cities just to attend classes. In Montreal, international students are forced to live in hostels or share tiny rooms with multiple occupants, raising questions about housing equity. Local governments have also resisted change, often stymied by "not in my backyard" (NIMBY) attitudes and complex permitting processes. For instance, in Vancouver, opposition from local residents delayed the construction of much-needed high-density housing projects for years, citing concerns over neighborhood character and increased traffic. Similarly, in Toronto, a proposed affordable housing project was stalled due to pushback from nearby homeowners, highlighting how these attitudes can significantly slow progress. These examples showcase how NIMBYism, while rooted in personal preferences, perpetuates the broader housing crisis by restricting the development of inclusive and sustainable communities. Development taxes and fees, which add up to 20% of housing costs in some cities, further hinder affordability. The result? A housing market that seems out of reach for an increasing number of Canadians. A deeper examination reveals that many Canadians are opting to delay significant life milestones. Young adults are postponing marriage and children, believing they need to achieve financial stability before committing to these life changes. As this cycle continues, Canada faces broader societal implications, such as a declining birth rate and aging population, which further strain the nation's economy. Additionally, the lack of affordable housing has forced many Canadians to leave major cities for smaller towns, resulting in growing urban sprawl and increased commuting times. The soaring cost of living housing isn't the only financial burden Canadians face. Rising costs for everyday necessities, from groceries to fuel, are taking their toll. Food prices have surged by more than 10% since 2022, with nearly 2 million Canadians relying on food banks in March 2023, a figure double that of 2019. This growing reliance on food banks has exposed vulnerabilities in Canada's social safety net, as even middle-class families now turn to these resources to survive. One major factor driving food prices is the lack of competition. Just a handful of companies dominate the grocery market, controlling 80% of sales. This consolidation, unchecked by government action, has led to inflated prices. Bread is a striking example, with only 2 major producers dictating costs. Government policies protecting the dairy, poultry, and egg industries also contribute to higher grocery bills, adding an estimated $450 annually to the average Canadian family's expenses. Moreover, extreme weather events and global supply chain disruptions have compounded these issues, making fresh produce and other essentials even more expensive. Fuel costs are another pain point. The federal carbon tax, while aimed at reducing emissions, has made gasoline and heating more expensive than ever. Rural communities, where public transportation is limited or non-existent, are especially hard hit. For example, farmers reliant on diesel-powered equipment face increased production costs, while city dwellers might rely on public transit to offset fuel expenses. This disparity highlights the uneven impact of the carbon tax across urban and rural areas, further emphasizing the need for nuanced policy adjustments that consider regional differences. Canadians now pay more for fuel than residents of any other G7 country. While the government highlights rebates to offset these costs, reports from the Parliamentary Budget Officer suggest the financial strain outweighs the benefits. For families in rural areas who rely heavily on their vehicles, these added costs are particularly burdensome, as public transportation remains limited. Adding to the burden are Canada's notoriously high telecommunications costs. Canadians pay 7 times more for cell phone plans than Australians and up to 1,000 times more than people in Finland. The recent merger of Rogers and Shaw, which reduced competition further, highlights the government's failure to protect consumers from monopolistic practices. Banking fees also remain among the highest in the developed world, with Canadians paying an average of $250 more annually compared to peers in the UK or Australia. These hidden costs accumulate over time, further straining household budgets. Canadians are finding creative ways to cope, including bartering services, buying in bulk, and even growing their own produce. However, these solutions can only go so far in alleviating the mounting pressures. The growing number of working poor who have stable jobs but still can't make ends meet underscores the severity of the issue. Teachers, healthcare workers, and other essential service providers are increasingly struggling to afford basic necessities, raising questions about wage stagnation and economic fairness. A faltering economy. With rising costs, economic growth could provide relief, but Canada's economy is struggling. Productivity has declined since 2019, while countries like the US have seen gains of 6%. Stagnant wages and reduced quality of life are byproducts of this slowdown. One culprit is declining private sector investment. Canadian businesses are increasingly funneling money abroad, citing regulatory challenges and limited returns at home. This lack of investment stems from a combination of unfavorable government policies and high market concentration, where a few dominant companies face little competition and therefore have no incentive to innovate or reinvest. For example, manufacturing and resource sectors, once robust, have experienced significant declines, leading to job losses in key industries. The energy sector, once a cornerstone of Canada's economy, has seen significant disinvestment. Annual energy investments have dropped by $60 billion since 2014, partly due to federal policies discouraging oil and gas development. Efforts to pivot toward technology and renewable energy have been slow, with tech sector growth barely keeping up with inflation since 2016. While green initiatives hold promise, Canada lags behind countries like Germany and Norway in implementing renewable energy solutions at scale. Canada is also losing its brightest minds. Each year, 7% of Canadians move to the US, drawn by higher wages, lower living costs, and greater opportunities. This trend is particularly evident in sectors like healthcare, technology, and engineering, where skilled professionals seek better career prospects and work-life balance abroad. The loss of talent in these critical areas not only depletes Canada's workforce, but also hampers innovation, reducing the country's ability to compete on a global scale. As a result, industries struggle to fill key positions, which in turn affects economic growth and public services. This brain drain undermines Canada's ability to compete globally, further exacerbating its economic challenges. Skilled professionals in healthcare, engineering, and technology are leaving in droves, citing better work-life balance and career prospects abroad. Moreover, Canada's regulatory environment makes it difficult for new businesses to thrive. Entrepreneurs often face long waits for permits and excessive paperwork, discouraging innovation. In contrast, countries with more streamlined processes, like the US and Singapore, attract startups and foreign investors alike. This lack of entrepreneurial dynamism has further stifled economic growth. For instance, while Canada has potential to lead in artificial intelligence and quantum computing, bureaucratic hurdles prevent these industries from flourishing. Social implications of economic challenges. Beyond the economic numbers lies the human cost. Consider, for instance, the story of Maria, a single mother living in Toronto. Maria works 2 jobs to provide for her children, yet she still struggles to make ends meet. Rising rent and skyrocketing grocery bills leave little room for anything else, forcing her to rely on local food banks. Her oldest son, Alex, dreams of attending university but feels the weight of financial strain and doubts whether his family can afford the tuition. Maria's story is one of many that illustrate how economic pressures are reshaping lives. For young professionals like Jason, the challenges manifest differently. After graduating with honors in engineering, he expected to find a promising job in Canada. Instead, he discovered a competitive job market offering low salaries and high living costs, prompting him to accept a better-paying position abroad. Stories like Jason's highlight a troubling trend: the loss of young, skilled talent to other countries. This phenomenon isn't just about economics, it's about the erosion of hope and opportunity within Canada's borders. When young professionals leave, they take with them the potential for innovation, growth, and future leadership. For families, the financial burden has forced many to make tough decisions. Some have postponed having children, fearing they won't be able to provide a stable home environment. Others have moved away from major cities, seeking more affordable living in smaller towns, only to face long commutes and fewer job opportunities. These shifts have profound social implications, from declining birth rates to the fragmentation of communities. Seniors, too, are feeling the pinch. Many retirees who once believed they had saved enough for their golden years are now returning to the workforce to cover rising expenses. Fixed incomes don't stretch as far as they once did, especially when faced with escalating housing, medical, and utility costs. This growing financial insecurity among seniors challenges the notion of retirement as a time of rest and leisure. Meanwhile, children and young people are growing up in an environment of scarcity. The rising cost of extracurricular activities, coupled with parents' financial stress, limits their access to opportunities that previous generations may have taken for granted. This could have long-term consequences on their development, aspirations, and future contributions to society. The search for solutions. Despite these challenges, there are paths forward. Policy changes, grassroots activism, and innovative solutions could help Canada reclaim its promise. The housing crisis, for instance, could be addressed through aggressive construction of affordable units, streamlining zoning regulations, and encouraging higher density developments. Governments could also expand rent controls and offer greater incentives for first-time homebuyers. To combat the cost of living crisis, fostering competition in the grocery, telecommunications, and banking sectors would drive prices down. Investments in public transportation, particularly in rural areas, could alleviate the financial strain of rising fuel costs. At the same time, targeted carbon tax rebates for vulnerable populations could make environmental policies fairer and more sustainable. In terms of economic growth, promoting private sector investment and reducing bureaucratic red tape could rejuvenate industries and encourage entrepreneurship. Investments in renewable energy, artificial intelligence, and technology sectors could create high-paying jobs while reducing reliance on fossil fuels. Moreover, addressing the brain drain would require improving wages and working conditions in key sectors, ensuring young talent sees a future in Canada. However, these solutions require bold leadership and a commitment to long-term change. The voices of everyday Canadians, those struggling to afford housing, food, and basic necessities, must be heard and prioritized in policy decisions. Collaboration across all levels of government, businesses, and communities is essential to building a more equitable and prosperous Canada. Conclusion: a call to action. Canada stands at a crossroads. The vision of a country where opportunity abounds and hard work pays off is under threat. Yet, with the right choices, this vision can be restored. The challenges are immense, but so too is the potential for change. As we navigate this defining moment in Canada's history, let us remember the ideals that brought this nation together: fairness, opportunity, and a commitment to leaving no one behind. Together, we can rebuild the Canadian dream, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. Let's turn frustration into action and uncertainty into hope.